story you're about to hear, this is a story about a 7-year-old girl who trusted everyone in her home, a 15-year-old brother who should have protected her, and a secret so devastating it shattered a family's foundation forever. What you're about to hear isn't a horror movie, it's real, and it happens more often than you think, behind closed door in a neighborhood that looks just like yours. Before we continue, this story involves child abuse. We won't share graphic details, but the topic itself is sensitive and distressing. We are telling this story because awareness saves lives, because education prevents harm, because sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger on the street, it's someone sleeping down the hall. If this story helps even one child, even one parent recognize warning signs before it's too late, then every difficult word we speak here matters. If you need to step away at any point, we understand. But if you can stay, please do, because this is a conversation we desperately need to have. Now, before we dive deeper, let us know in the comment section where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Michelle family looks like so many others in their quiet suburb neighborhood outside Portland, Oregon. Robert and Diana Michelle were both international consultants, the kind of professional who spent more time in airport lounges than at home. Their work took them across continents, sometimes for weeks at a time, but they believed they'd built a safe foundation for their children. They had a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a backyard that backed into a nature preserve, the kind of place where kids could be kids, where family barbecue on weekend and neighborhood wave to each other across manicured lawns. Inside the house were two children, Ethan, 15-year-old, and his younger sister Sophie, who had just turned 7. Different mother, same father, a blended family that seems to be making it work. At least that's what everyone thought. Ethan was the kind of teenager who immediately stood out. He wasn't the captain of the football team or the class president. He was quiet, spent most of his time in his room, and kept to himself at school. Teacher described him as withdrawn but not problematic. He turned in his assignment, showed up on time, and never caused trouble. His parents saw a moody teenager going through typical adolescent phase. What they didn't see was the hours he spent alone online. Doors he was opening in the darkest corner of the internet, thoughts taking root in his mind that he was too ashamed to share with anyone. Sophie, on the other hand, was everything you expect from a 7-year-old. Bright, curious, full of energy and trust. She loved drawing pictures of princesses and animals. She would beg her parents for bedtime story, and she worshipped her older brother. In her eyes, Ethan could do no wrong. He was the cool teenager who sometimes played video game with her, who knew how to fix things, who made her laugh. When their parents traveled, which was often, Ethan was left in charge. Misha and a neighbor, Miss Chen, who checked in daily, but Ethan was considered mature enough to handle the responsibility. He was 15, after all, almost an adult. He could cook basic meals, make sure Sophie did her homework, and kept the house in order. They trusted him completely, and Sophie trusted him even more. The thing about abuse within family is that it rarely announces itself with siren and flashing lights. It doesn't leave obvious bruise or broken bones. It happens in silence, in moments stolen when no one else is watching, behind doors that should represent safety but instead became a chamber of betrayal. Research tells us that siblings abuse is more common than most people realize, yet it remains one of the most underreported and misunderstood form of family violence. According to experts who study these cases, the abuse often begins in homes where there are inadequate supervision, where children are exposed to inappropriate content without guidance, where emotional needs go unmet, and confusion fasting in isolation. Ethan Michelle fits that pattern in ways his parents never suspected. Sophie's world became smaller within her, even understanding it was happening. She started having nightmares, waking up crying in the middle of the night. She began wetting the bed, something she hadn't done in years. Her appetite disappeared. The happy, talkative little girl who used to call her parents every night on video chat suddenly had nothing to say. When Diana asked how she was doing, Sophie would just nod and say she was fine, her eyes distant and sad. Her parents noticed but attributed it to missing them. They promised to be home soon. They sent gifts. They scheduled more frequent video calls. They did everything except come home immediately. They did not know that every day they stayed away was another day their daughter suffered in silence. Another day the person who should have protected her became the source of her deepest pain. The abuse itself follows patterns that professionals who work with this case see over and over again. It started with boundary violations that seemed minor, inappropriate comments, requests for physical contact that felt wrong but were framed as games or jokes. Then it escalated. Ethan used his position of authority as the older sibling, the one in charge, the one their parents trusted. He manipulated Sophie's natural love and trust for him. He told her this was their special secret. He told her she would get in trouble if she told anyone. He told her no one would believe her anyway, and she believed him because he was her brother, because she was 7 years old, because she didn't understand that what was happening to her had a name, that it was wrong, that it wasn't her fault. Can you imagine being that young and carrying that kind of secrets? Can you imagine the confusion, the shame, the fear of a child who loves her brother but knows something is terribly wrong? Think about that for a moment. Really think about it, because this is where we need to pause and ask ourselves, how did we as a society create a world where a 7-year-old girl can be abused in her own home while adults go about their business, missing every single warning sign? The signs were there. They were subtle, but they were there. Sophie's second grade teacher, Miss Anderson, noticed changes in her behavior at school. Sophie, who used to raise her hand eagerly to answer questions, now sat silent and withdrawn. She stopped playing with other children during recess, instead sitting alone under a tree. Her artwork, once filled with bright colors and happy scenes, became dark and chaotic. One particular drawing caught Miss Anderson's attention. It showed a small figure in the corner of a house with a larger figure looming over her, both drawn in heavy black stroke. When Miss Anderson gently asked Sophie about it, the little girl's eyes filled with tears and she refused to explain. Miss Anderson documented this observation and brought them up during a parent-teacher conference call with Diana Michelle in early November. Diana was calling from a hotel room in Frankfurt, exhausted from back-to-back meetings. She listened to the teacher's concern, but explained that Sophie was probably just adjusting to them being away so much. She promised they would be home for Thanksgiving and would spend more quality time with her. Miss Anderson pushed a little suggestion. Maybe Sophie could talk to the school counselor, but Diana assured her it wasn't necessary. Everything was fine at home. Ethan was taking good care of his sister. The conversation ended with pleasantries and promises to follow up, but nothing changed. What Miss Anderson didn't know, what she couldn't have known without clearer disclosure, was that Sophie was living in a private nightmare. Every evening after Miss Chen left, Sophie would try to stay in her room with the door locked, but Ethan had taken away the safety. He'd removed the lock, claiming it was broken. He had access to her whenever he wanted. Sophie tried to resist in the only way a 7-year-old knows how. She'd say she didn't want to watch movie with him. She'd say she was tired. She'd say she had homework. But Ethan always had a response. He'd get angry. He'd threaten to tell their parents she was being bad. He'd promise her treat or privilege if she complied. And when those tactics didn't work, he simply used his physical size and strength to get what he wanted. The isolation Sophie felt during those weeks was absolute. She couldn't tell her parents because they were thousands of miles away and Ethan had convinced her they wouldn't believe her anyway. She couldn't tell Miss Chen because the abuse happened after the neighbor left each evening. She tried to tell her teacher through her drawings, through her behavior, through her silence, but the message wasn't clear enough for anyone to decode them. This is the horrible reality of child abuse. It thrives in isolation. It depends on silence. It counts on adults being too busy, too trusting, too uncomfortable to look closer at the possibility that something unthinkable might be happening right under their noses. By mid-November, Sophie had stopped sleeping through the night entirely. She'd developed a nervous habit of picking at her fingernails until they bleed. She flinched when anyone touched her unexpectedly. She began refusing to go home after school, making up excuses to stay in the classroom or the library. Miss Anderson noticed all of this and made another call to Sophie's parents. This time she was more direct. She said Sophie was showing signs of emotional distress that couldn't be ignored. She strongly recommended that the Michelle come home and take Sophie to a child psychologist for evaluation. Diana, now in London for a crucial project presentation, felt a flash of real worry but pushed it aside. She promised they would schedule something when they returned home for Thanksgiving, which was only 2 weeks away. Surely Sophie could wait 2 more weeks. Surely whatever was bothering her could be addressed then. It was the wrong decision, though Diana couldn't have known the full extent of how wrong it was. What finally broke the silence wasn't a dramatic revelation or a carefully planned intervention. It was a single moment of desperation. On a Tuesday afternoon in late November, just 3 days before the Michelle was scheduled to return home, Sophie's third-grade gym teacher, Coach Williams, noticed Sophie crying in the locker room after class. She approached gently, kneeling down to Sophie's eye level and asked what was wrong. For a week, Sophie had held everything inside, but something about Coach Williams' kind face, about the gentle tone of her voice, about the simple act of someone actually stopping to really see her, broke through the walls Sophie had built, through tears and halting words. Sophie said something that made Coach Williams' blood run cold. She said, "My brother does things to me that makes me feel scared. He said it's our secret and I'll get in trouble if I tell. But I don't want him to do it anymore. I want it to stop.